In 1935, the federal government sent soil scientists out to the Texas Panhandle to study what had just happened. 3 million acres had blown into the sky in a single afternoon. Farms that families had worked for 20 years were buried under their own topsoil. The government men drove county road after county road looking at the damage. Then they found one farm that hadn't moved, my grandfather's. They knocked on his door and asked him what he'd done differently. He told them. They wrote it down, filed the report, and nobody ever heard about it again. My name is Earl Pruitt. My family has farmed the same ground in the Texas Panhandle for 3 generations. My grandfather survived the Dust Bowl without losing a single acre of topsoil, using methods he learned before the government, before the chemical companies, before any of it arrived out here telling us how to farm. Every neighbor within 12 miles of us eventually sold out or walked away, some during the Dust Bowl, most in the 1980s when the debt caught up with what the government had told them to do. My grandfather's land is still producing, so is mine. I am the last farmer in this county still working the land the way he did. I'm putting this on record because the men who carried this knowledge are almost all gone now. What they knew about soil, seed, water, weather, took a lifetime to build and is disappearing one old man at a time. Before we count down, 3 things coming later you should know about. Number 3 is a meat preservation method my grandmother used that kept pork edible for 18 months without a refrigerator. The USDA stopped teaching it when the appliance industry arrived. The chemistry is sound, it just doesn't sell freezers. Number 1 is the single most important diagnostic tool on a panhandle farm. No instrument, no lab, no cost. My grandfather used it every week for 60 years. Most farmers today have never heard of it. By the time we get there, you'll understand why. And somewhere in the middle of this list, we're going to talk about what happened to the Ogallala Aquifer and why the method my grandfather used to farm on 12 inches of rain a year is suddenly the most relevant thing on the southern plains. These aren't old-timer stories. This is a working library that got shut down so somebody else could sell you the replacement. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, hit subscribe before we start. I don't have a sponsor. I don't have a product. What I have is 60 years of watching what works and what doesn't on this specific piece of ground. That's all this is. Let's count them down. Number 20. Reading the sky without a forecast. My grandfather never once paid for a weather report. He read the horizon. Specific colors at specific times told him what was building 2 days out. Cattle restless in the afternoon for no obvious reason, pressure change coming, anthill activity dropping off fast, moisture on the way. He could call rain 48 hours out with accuracy that surprised the extension agents who came through in the 50s selling forecasting subscriptions. That's when it stopped. Not because his method failed. Because someone figured out how to charge for the alternative. He said the land would tell you everything the sky wouldn't. I've never bought a forecast either. Number 19. Saving open-pollinated wheat seed. Before the seed companies arrived, every panhandle farmer saved seed from his strongest stalks every fall. Not randomly, selectively, the stalks that stood up best in wind. The ones that produced in a dry year. You were breeding your wheat to your specific ground year after year for decades. The variety my grandfather grew was Turkey Red, brought to the Great Plains by Mennonite settlers from Russia in 1874. Deep-rooted, drought-hardy, it knew how to be thirsty. Then hybrid seed contracts made saving seed illegal. Farmers who kept doing it faced lawsuits. His seed had been learning this soil for 40 years. They made that illegal. I want you to sit with that before we move on. Number 18. Dryland terracing by hand contour terracing, building level ridges across a slope to catch rainwater instead of letting it run off, was already common on panhandle farms before the Soil Conservation Service formally introduced it in 1935. My grandfather built his by hand and by eye. No GPS, no laser level. He read the fall of the land the way you'd read a sentence, slowly, more than once, until you understood it. The SCS came through after the Dust Bowl and documented that farms which had been terracing informally lost significantly less topsoil than their neighbors. They got credit for the idea. The farmers who'd already figured it out got nothing. He didn't need a GPS, he needed a good eye and a half day. Number 17. The Shelter Belt. Before the government told you to, between 1935 and 1942, the federal government planted 220 million trees across the Great Plains as wind barriers. They called it the Shelter Belt Project. They took credit for saving the topsoil. My grandfather planted a line of Osage orange along his north fence line in 1921. 14 years before the government's program started, Osage orange grows dense, low, and fast. Cattle won't push through it. It breaks the wind at ground level where the damage actually happens. That tree line is still standing. The government got the credit. The farmers who survived already knew it. Number 16. Soil reading by touch and smell. Healthy soil has a smell. It comes from actinobacteria living in it, a compound called geosmin. Pick up a handful of good soil, and it smells like rain, like earth, like something alive. That ground is working. Dead soil has no smell. A handful of healthy soil, squeezed and released, holds its shape briefly, then crumbles. Dead soil either stays packed like clay or falls apart immediately. No biology holding it together. My grandfather never sent a soil sample to a lab in his life. Neither did I. The soil tells you. You just have to learn to ask it the right way. Number 15. Strip cropping against the wind. Alternating strips of wheat and fallow ground laid perpendicular to the southwest wind created friction at ground level that slowed the wind before it could lift topsoil. Farmers who used this in the Dust Bowl years lost an estimated 30 to 50% less topsoil than neighbors who didn't. Then farm consolidation made it impractical. You can't run a 1,000-acre monoculture in strips. Single crop planting replaced it. In 1936, one bad wind took 6 inches of topsoil off every farm in this county that wasn't stripped. We didn't lose an inch. 6 inches of topsoil takes 600 years to replace. That's not a farming statistic. That's a civilization statistic. Number 14. The fallow year. This one has a specific date attached to it. Leaving a field completely unplanted every 3rd year, letting it rest, accumulate moisture, rebuild organic matter, was standard practice here before 1938. That year, the Agricultural Adjustment Act began paying farmers per bushel produced. Fallowing became unprofitable overnight. Most farmers stopped within a few years. Soil organic matter in the Texas Panhandle has declined by an estimated 50 to 60% since the 1940s. That's USDA data, their own numbers. They paid him to plant every acre every year. That's when the land started dying. The government didn't do it with malice, they did it with a check. That's harder to argue with and harder to undo. Number 13. Companion planting in the kitchen garden. While wheat was the cash crop, every Panhandle farm family kept a kitchen garden using companion planting. Corn, beans, and squash together, the Three Sisters method. Marigolds to suppress nematodes. Dill to draw beneficial insects. No purchased inputs. No chemical pest control. My grandmother could feed 8 people through a drought year out of a half acre. She never bought a pesticide or a fertilizer. The plants did the work for each other because she knew which ones to put next to which. That skill is gone, not because it stopped working, because the grocery store arrived and made it optional. Once something's optional, it only takes one generation to lose it. Number 12. Windmill reading. Old Panhandle windmills pumped water from the Ogallala Aquifer before electric submersible pumps replaced them in the 1960s and 70s. A skilled farmer could hear his windmill from 200 yards and tell you exactly what the water table was doing. A change in rotation rhythm meant the pump was pulling harder. A sucker rod about to go had its own sound, if you knew what to listen for. Electric pumps are more efficient. They're also silent. You only find out something's wrong when they fail completely. He could tell you the water level in that well by the sound of the mill. That's not superstition. That's 40 years of paying attention to one machine on one piece of ground. Number 11. Dust mulching. This one is coming back whether the industry wants it to or not. Before Ogallala irrigation became cheap in the 1950s, Panhandle farmers grew wheat on as little as 12 inches of annual rainfall using a method called dust mulching. Immediately after any rain, you work the top 2 to 3 inches of soil into a fine powder. That layer acted as a capillary break, sealing moisture below it from evaporating into the dry air. Done correctly, it could hold subsoil moisture for weeks in a Texas summer. The USDA now reports some Panhandle counties have lost 50% of the Ogallalas' saturated thickness. The water that replaced this method is running out. My grandfather farmed 18 inches of rain a year and never went broke. The neighbors who switched to irrigation went broke when the water got expensive. We're watching that happen again right now. Number 10. Reading the wheat tilt. Experienced growers could read a wheat field's health by the angle and color of individual stems at specific growth stages. A slight purple cast on the underside of lower leaves at jointing, phosphorus deficiency. A specific forward lean in the canopy on a still morning, moisture stress in the root system. These diagnostics took years of observation to learn. They were passed from grandfather to father to son by walking the field together season after season until the son saw what the father saw without being told what to look for. A soil test costs $40 and takes 10 days. The field tells you right now if you know how to look. Most people don't anymore because nobody walked the field with them. Number 9. Saving sorghum for the hard years. Grain sorghum is drought-tolerant in a way wheat is not. When conditions get bad enough, sorghum goes dormant instead of dying. It waits. Wheat doesn't. My grandfather grew a strip of sorghum on every field as insurance, emergency feed for the cattle, emergency grain for the family. When the wheat burned up in 1936, the sorghum fed us and the cattle through the winter. As farms consolidated and specialized in single-crop wheat for government subsidies, the sorghum strips disappeared. No subsidy for sorghum, no check for keeping a backup, so people stopped keeping one. Then the hard years came, and there was nothing to fall back on. Number 8. The root cellar. A Panhandle root cellar dug to the right depth, 8 to 10 feet, held a year-round temperature of 50 to 55 degrees. Potatoes, onions, canned goods, salt-cured meat from one harvest to the next. No electricity, no refrigeration. But the skill wasn't in the digging, it was in knowing where to dig. North-facing slope, away from tree roots. Drainage fall built into the floor so spring water ran out instead of pooling. A poorly sited root cellar flooded or overheated and ruined everything in it. A well-sited one worked for generations. The last people who know how to site one correctly are in their 80s now. His root cellar was never empty. Ours never has been either. It cost us nothing but knowing where to dig. Number 7. The rain gauge made from a coffee can. My grandfather kept a coffee can on a fence post. After every rain he recorded the date, the amount, which field. He did this for 40 years. Over time that record revealed the exact rainfall pattern of this specific quarter section, not the county average. This ground. Planting decisions, fallow schedules, which fields got sorghum strips, all of it came from that record. The county extension office gave you county averages, but this piece of ground gets rained differently than the ground 3 miles east. 40 years of coffee can records told him exactly how differently. You can't buy that record. You have to live it. Number 6. Burning the pasture. Controlled burning of pasture land every 3 to 5 years. a practice the Comanche and Kiowa had used on this land for 1,000 years before any farmer arrived, removed invasive mesquite and cedar, returned nutrients to the soil, and drove native grass regrowth. The burns were timed to early spring after a soaking rain before bird nesting season. You read the wind, knew the terrain, had your fire break in place before you lit anything. It cost nothing, and it worked. Fire suppression policies in the 20th century ended it. Mesquite encroachment has since reduced panhandle grazing capacity by 30 to 40% on affected land. The Comanche burned this land for 1,000 years. It was the richest grassland on earth. We stopped 60 years ago. Now it's half mesquite. Number 5. Turkey red wheat. Turkey red arrived on the Great Plains in 1874, brought by Mennonite immigrants from Russia. Deep-rooted, drought-hardy, adapted over 70 years of selection to this specific soil and climate. It yielded less per acre than the hybrid varieties that replaced it in the 1950s and 60s. In a good year, the hybrids beat it. In a hard year, a dry year, the kind of year this region produces regularly, the hybrids produced nothing. Turkey red produced something. The hybrids were designed for yield in ideal conditions. The Panhandle doesn't always provide ideal conditions. Turkey red knew that. The land had taught it. Turkey red still exists in seed banks. Most Panhandle farmers have never heard of it. Number 4. The no-plow edge. Every field on my grandfather's farm had a deliberate unplowed edge, 10 to 15 feet of native grass left along the fence lines. It held the soil against wind at the field margin where erosion starts. It gave habitat to beneficial insects that controlled pest pressure naturally. It prevented chemical runoff into waterways. When government acreage payments began counting every inch of planted ground in the 1950s, farmers plowed the edges. The check was bigger if you planted to the fence. Pest pressure increased. Erosion at the margins accelerated. He plowed every inch except the edges. They told him he was wasting ground. He said he was saving it. The soil data from that period proves he was right. Number 3. Curing meat without refrigeration. The one I mentioned at the start. Before rural electrification reached the Panhandle in the late 1930s and 40s, farm families cured pork in a specific sequence. A dry salt rub, 7 days per inch of thickness, not a guess, a calculation. Then cold smoking at 80 to 90 degrees for 8 to 12 hours over mesquite. Then hanging in a cool, dry space. Done correctly, that meat lasted 12 to 18 months without refrigeration. My grandmother cured pork that stayed good through 2 full summers. The knowledge, salt ratios, smoking temperature judged by touch, hanging conditions, was passed by doing it, not reading about it. When refrigeration arrived, it stopped within 1 generation. That's not a coincidence. Refrigerators needed to be sold. A family that could preserve its own meat for 18 months without electricity was a family that didn't need a very large one. Number 2. The windmill water system. Before electric pumps, every Panhandle farm built a gravity-fed water system from the windmill, a raised storage tank that fed the house, the barn, and the garden by elevation alone. No pump required once the tank was filled. The windmill filled it. Gravity did the rest. Designing it correctly required calculating tank height, pipe diameter, distance, and fall to each outlet, all by hand and eye. No engineering degree, no blueprint, just understanding how water moves. My grandfather designed a system that ran this farm for 60 years without a single electric pump. My neighbor's electric system goes down every ice storm. Ours never has. Number 1. What the grass told you. The single most important diagnostic on a Panhandle farm was the native grass. Which species were present, in what proportion, how they were changing year to year. That told a farmer more about soil health, rainfall patterns, and overgrazing pressure than any test ever designed. Buffalo grass dominant meant healthy, deep soil working the way it was supposed to. Shinnery oak expanding into a pasture meant moisture stress in the root zone. Tumbleweeds taking a corner meant that ground was dead, the biology gone, the structure gone, nothing left to hold it. This was learned by walking the pasture with your father every year for a decade. It required knowing 30 to 40 plant species by sight in every season. That knowledge takes a working lifetime to build. My grandfather never tested his soil in a lab. He watched the grass. He said the grass doesn't lie. In 60 years of farming next to him and after him, I have found that to be true. These 20 things didn't disappear because they stopped working. The soil science behind strip cropping is in the textbooks. The chemistry of salt-cured meat is documented. Turkey red wheat is sitting in a seed bank right now. The Ogallala data is public record. What disappeared was the decision to teach it, because there was no money in a farmer who could read his own soil, save his own seed, preserve his own meat, and manage his own water. There was money in the alternative, and the alternative got sold. I'm not telling you anything that isn't documented. I'm telling you where to look. Pick one thing from this list. Look into it for your own place, your own ground. Then come down to the comments and tell me what county you're from. Tell me what your grandfather farmed. Tell me what your family still does, or what you remember them doing that nobody does anymore. That comment section is where this knowledge stops disappearing. Keep your roots in the ground.